There is a lie being told about China. The lie is that they are conquering Africa. The truth? They are terrified of it. In 2011, when the Libyan civil war broke out, Beijing didn't send troops to protect their investments. They didn't send diplomats to save their allies. They sent the Navy to run away. In just 10 days, China evacuated 35,000 workers. They packed their engineers, their doctors, and their laborers onto frigates and Greek cruise ships and sailed away. They abandoned billions of dollars in oil rigs, railways, and housing projects. They simply locked the door and left. This isn't the behavior of a superpower. It is the behavior of a tourist. China will build your road when the sun is shining. But today, we are going to show you why the moment the storm hits, the dragon disappears.
To understand why this happens, you have to stop looking at the soldiers and start looking at the rulebook. You have to look at the operating system that runs Beijing's foreign policy. It is called the 5 Principles of Peaceful Coexistence. It sounds boring, like diplomatic fluff, but it is actually the most ruthless policy on Earth. The core rule is simple: non-interference. On paper, this sounds noble. China goes to African leaders and says, "We are not like the Americans or the French. We won't invade you. We won't lecture you on human rights. We won't tell you how to run your elections. We just want to trade." For a lot of leaders, that is a very attractive offer. It's business without the baggage. But in practice, non-interference is a mask for indifference. It means China has made a legal decision to be blind to human suffering. If a regime suppresses its own population, China buys the oil. If a local militia seizes a town and burns it down, China builds the bridge right next to the ashes. If a civil war breaks out, China evacuates the workers and waits for the winner to emerge so they can sign the next check. This transactional coldness worked perfectly for 30 years. It worked because China was just a merchant. When you are just a shopkeeper, nobody expects you to be the police. But here is the trap Xi Jinping has walked into. China isn't a shopkeeper anymore. They are trying to be a superpower. They are building military bases. They are the largest creditor on the continent. They are the primary partner for 54 nations. And when you act like a superpower, the world expects you to provide security. You cannot claim to lead the global south if you are terrified of holding the line. The West, for all its faults, understands that stability requires involvement. You have to train armies. You have to broker peace deals. Sometimes you have to pick a side. China refuses to pick a side. They think they can remain neutral forever. But in a room full of wolves, the guy who refuses to hold a weapon doesn't stay neutral. He becomes lunch. And this policy of strategic cowardice creates a massive vacuum. China owns the mines, the ports, and the rails, but they refuse to defend them. They assume that because they paid for the concrete will protect itself. They are wrong. And in the next part, we are going to look at the exact moment this philosophy collapsed and Chinese soldiers left vulnerable civilians to die. If you think strategic cowardice is just a harsh nickname I came up with, you need to look at what happened in Juba, South Sudan, in July 2016. This is the moment the mask slipped. This is the moment the African continent realized that the dragon might have sharp claws, but it has no spine. To set the scene, South Sudan is a country born in blood. It has vast oil reserves, oil that China desperately needs. Because of this, Beijing deployed a full infantry battalion of UN peacekeepers to the capital city, Juba. These weren't construction workers. These were trained soldiers from the People's Liberation Army. They were armed, they had armored personnel carriers, and they had a very specific United Nations mandate to protect civilians with lethal force if necessary. In July 2016, the political situation in Juba collapsed. The president and the vice president turned on each other. Heavy fighting broke out across the city. Tanks were rolling through the streets. The violence quickly reached the protection of civilian sites. These were essentially refugee camps right next to the UN bases, housing tens of thousands of terrified women and children who had fled the war. When the government troops attacked the camp, the civilians looked to the Chinese peacekeepers to hold the line. They expected the blue helmets to fire back. They expected a wall of steel. They didn't get it. According to a devastating report by the Center for Civilians in Conflict, an independent organization based in Washington, the Chinese troops abandoned their posts. Witnesses on the ground reported that as the attack intensified, the Chinese peacekeepers retreated into the main UN base. But they didn't just retreat, they left the civilians exposed. The report details how Chinese soldiers prioritized protecting themselves over the people they were sent to save. There are accounts of tear gas being fired into the crowds, not by the attackers, but potentially from the UN side to control panic, while chaos reigned. While the peacekeepers hunkered down inside their fortified positions, aid workers in a nearby compound were overrun. They called for help for hours. No one came. This incident sent a shockwave through the diplomatic world. It proved a terrifying reality. When the choice is between saving African lives and protecting Chinese lives, Beijing chooses itself every single time. You have to understand the damage this does to a reputation. You can build 1,000 hospitals, you can pave 1,000,000 miles of road, but if you hide in a bunker while the people you are supposed to be helping are being attacked, you lose all moral authority. And Juba wasn't an isolated incident. It is a pattern. Fast forward to the Central African Republic in 2023. Gold mining is big business there. A Chinese company, the Gold Coast Group, had set up operations in a volatile region. Everyone knew the area was dangerous. Rebels were active, the government had lost control. Did China send security forces to protect their citizens? No, they relied on the local government. Gunmen stormed the site. They lined up the workers. 9 Chinese nationals were executed. What was Beijing's response? Did they launch a special forces raid to hunt down the killers? Did they deploy drones? No. The foreign ministry in Beijing issued a level red travel warning. They told their citizens to evacuate the area. They issued a strong condemnation. That's it, a press release. Compare this to how other nations react. When American citizens are taken hostage or killed, the US moves carrier strike groups. When French citizens were threatened in the Sahel, France launched Operation Serval. You might disagree with their politics. You might hate their history, but you cannot deny their resolve. China, by contrast, acts like a ghost. This creates a massive security vacuum. China owns the asset, but they refuse to guard it. They outsource their security to local militias or corrupt police forces that are often part of the problem. And this is where the story gets even darker, because nature abhors a vacuum. If China won't provide the muscle, someone else will. Enter Russia. Over the last 5 years, we have seen a massive pivot in African security. Leaders in Mali, Burkina Faso, and the Central African Republic have realized that while China is great for loans, they are useless for war. So these leaders are turning to Moscow. The Wagner Group, now rebranded as the Africa Corps, has moved in to fill the gap that China left wide open. Russia provides the mercenaries. Russia provides the bodyguards for the presidents. Russia fights the jihadis in the desert. And what does Russia want in return? They want the exact same gold mines and resources that China is trying to buy. We are seeing a bizarre geopolitical marriage. China pays the bells, but Russia holds the gun. China is effectively funding regimes that are militarily dependent on Moscow. This is a strategic nightmare for Xi Jinping. He is pouring billions of dollars into infrastructure on a continent where he has zero military control. He is building glass houses in a war zone and hoping no one throws a stone. And the stones are starting to fly. Terrorist groups in Pakistan are specifically targeting Chinese engineers because they know it is an easy win. Insurgents in Nigeria know that kidnapping Chinese workers guarantees a ransom payment, not a rescue mission. China has projected an image of weakness. They have shown the world that they are risk-averse. In the brutal logic of geopolitics, risk aversion is just another word for prey. But the biggest cost isn't financial. It isn't even strategic. The biggest cost is human. And in the final part of the story, we need to talk about the people who are actually paying the price for this cowardice. We need to talk about the African youth and why the next generation is starting to see the dragon not as a savior, but as a traitor.
This brings us to the final and perhaps most tragic part of the story. This is the suicide part of the argument. To understand why this strategy is doomed, you have to look at the numbers. China is betting everything on Africa's future. By 2050, 1 in 4 humans on this planet will be African. The median age in China is getting older every day. The median age in Africa is 19. China needs this youth. They need the labor. They need the market. They need the consumers to keep their factories running when their own population collapses. But here is the massive calculation Beijing is missing. The youth of Africa care more about safety than cement. There is a fundamental disconnect between what China is selling and what the people actually need. Walk into a market in Maiduguri, in Borno State, Nigeria. Ask a young student what keeps them awake at night. They won't tell you, I wish the railway terminal had better Wi-Fi. They won't tell you, I wish the port in Lagos was more efficient. They will tell you, I want to walk to school without being kidnapped. They will tell you, I want the bombing to stop. China offers 5G networks to people who are afraid to leave their homes. It is like offering a drowning man a faster internet connection. It is insulting. Western powers, for all their faults, for all their colonial history and their hypocrisy, have spent billions of dollars training African militaries. They have shared intelligence. They have conducted drone strikes against Al-Shabaab and Boko Haram. When the United States builds a base in Djibouti or Niger, they project power outward. They patrol the skies. When China builds a base, they build a wall to hide behind. The perception among the African youth is shifting rapidly. 10 years ago, China was seen as a savior, the country that built the roads the West wouldn't touch. Today, China is increasingly seen as the rich uncle who comes to dinner, eats all the food, makes big promises, but runs out the back door the moment the robbers break in. Loyalty is bought with blood, not yuan. If China refuses to bleed for Africa, Africa will never truly bleed for China. This cowardice creates a relationship that is purely transactional, and transactional relationships are fragile. If tomorrow another power, say India or a resurgent Europe, offered a better deal and security, African leaders would switch sides in a heartbeat, because there is no trust, there is no shared struggle. China has spent 20 years building a fortress in Africa. They have paved the thousands of miles of road, they have dug the deepest mines, they have wired the entire continent for the internet. But they have built a glass fortress. It looks impressive from the outside, it shines in the sun, but it is brittle. As instability spreads across the Sahel and down into the coastal states of West Africa, the security situation is collapsing. We are seeing it in Burkina Faso. We are seeing it in Mali. China's solution to this chaos is always the same: evacuate, run, wait it out. But here is the problem with being a superpower. You cannot evacuate an entire continent's infrastructure. You cannot put a railway line on a boat and take it back to Shanghai. You cannot put a cobalt mine in your pocket. When you run away, you leave your assets behind. And more importantly, you leave the resentment of the people you abandoned. The jihadists and the warlords know this. They know China is a paper dragon. They know that if they attack a Chinese project, the response won't be a special forces raid. It will be a withdrawal. This makes Chinese projects the softest targets on the continent. It is an invitation to be looted. So where does this end? It ends with China owning a lot of tech, but holding zero power. They are building a world where they pay the bills, Russia provides the muscle, and the West provides the financial system. That isn't dominance. That is being the world's largest ATM. China thinks they can buy the world without fighting for it. They think history has changed. They think trade conquers all. But history has a very clear, very brutal lesson for nations that think that way. If you are not willing to be the policeman, you will eventually become the victim. China is sleepwalking into a trap of its own making. They are expanding into the most volatile region on Earth with a philosophy of pacifism that died in 1945. And when the glass fortress finally shatters, they will realize that concrete cannot shoot back. So China has the resources, but they lack the stomach for the fight. They are a giant with a fatal heart condition. But if China fails, who wins? There is a third player in this game. It is the one thing Xi Jinping cannot arrest, cannot censor, and cannot bribe. It is the kicking clock inside his own country. The real threat to China isn't American missiles or African terrorists. It is a simple math equation that is about to hit zero. If you want to know why China's entire empire might vanish before 2050 without a single shot being fired, make sure you are subscribed. We are covering the demographic collapse in the next deep dive. I'll see you in the comments.